This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
We're learning Parsha Shoftim, and right before Chamishi, the Torah tells us the pasuk Tamim Tihiyeh Hashem Elokecha, which is sounds very beautiful. You should be Tamim with Hashem, your God. But the question is, what exactly does this mean? What does it mean, Tamim Tihiyeh Hashem Elokecha? And presumably, we're going to get some clues from the fact that right before this pasuk, the Torah warned us about certain practices of divination, ma'oinen, menachesh, mechashev, chover chover, etc. After which the Torah tells us, Tamim Tihiyeh Hashem Elokecha, but what exactly does it mean, Tamim Tihiyeh? So the Baal HaTurim makes note of the fact that there is some tradition that the taf in the word Tamim is Gedoyla. Says the Baal HaTurim, number 2 on your sheets, taf Gedoyla, she'im telech bitmimos, if you walk with God wholesomely, completely, ki'ilu kiyamta me aleph v'yad taf. It's as if you fulfilled from aleph to taf. So that's a pretty wide, sweeping statement that if you do this, if you're a tamim, you're pretty good. You've fulfilled everything. The only question is, what exactly does it mean to be a tamim? How does one be a tamim? Hey, you, be a tamim. Stop not being a tamim already. You're not being a tamim enough. What do you want from me? What am I supposed to do? I put on my tefillin, I daven, but you're not being that tamim. I don't see that. What exactly? What do you want? So it's very interesting. If you look in the Rishonim, there are a number of different explanations and definitions of this pasuk, Tamim Tihiyeh Hashem Elokecha, and we will begin with the Chayvos Halvavos. Chayvos Halvavos written by Rabbeinu Bachya and Ibn Pakuda. The legend has it that on the table of the Rambam kept a copy of the Chayvos Halvavos. Chayvos Halvavos says, Tzarech Sheteda, and this is what he writes in his introduction. Ki hakavana v'hatayeles b'mitzvahs halavavos. The benefit and the purpose of the duties of the heart is sheyu gluyenu utzifuyenu utzifunenu shavim. That our outside and our inside are equal. Ushkulim v'avodas Hashem. In other words, most people, let me rephrase that. Everybody acts better than they are.
Wow.
Everybody puts on a show, without exception. Rabbi Meir, the story goes that one time after he finished benching, he turned to the person sitting next to him and he said, "Thank you for the Birchas Hamazon." So the person said, "Well, you made the Birchas Hamazon, not me." The Meir said, "No, but I benched better because you were there." And Rabbi Miller had the honesty to admit it. But we all need to admit the fact that we all act better when people are around. And the proof is, because if you're ever in a situation, for whatever reason, where you're not davening with a minyan, somehow the Shemona Esrei is not the same. Why is that? Because that's what the Tana told his Talmidim, Yeimara Shamayim Kamara Basavadam, that your fear of heaven should be like you fear people. So the goal of gaining the duties of the heart, the Chavos Havavos, is that your heart is equal to your outside. Ad Shatia Eidos Halev Halashin Mevam Shaveh, so that your heart and your limbs are on the same page. V'yatzti Kolechem Emes Chaver, and each one testifies and acknowledges its friend V'yoed Loi and testifies to it. In other words, there's no imbalance. There's no hypocrisy. It's not that we act better than what we're really feeling and thinking. And there's no difference. And there's no contradiction. We don't want to have internal contradiction. We don't want to be sitting there shuckling with our eyes closed and thinking about your stocks. That's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to achieve the level where our outer actions and our inner feelings are equal. And what is this called? Says the Chavos Havavos, V'hu asher yikra'eu hakasov tamim. That is the meaning of tamim. Ba'amroi, tamim tihiyeh Hashem Elokecha. When the Torah tells us, be tamim with Hashem, it means don't allow your outer actions to be on a different level than your your inner hargashas, your inner feelings, and your inner emunah. So according to the Chavos Havavos, the definition of tamim, the definition of wholesome, the definition of complete is no imbalance, no contradictions between your leiv and your evar. However, Rashi has the landmark pshat on this pasuk, Tamim Tihiyeh im Hashem Elokecha, and this is definitely pshuto shel mikra because it flows from what preceded it. Right before this pasuk, the Torah says, don't divine, don't read omens, don't go to sorcerers, don't go to animal charmers, don't consult the dead. Rather what? Tamim Tihiyeh im Hashem Elokecha, which means hishalech imay betmimas. Walk with God wholesomely. In other words, be innocent. Don't try to figure out what will be. Utitzap eloi, yearn for Him, yearn for God's kindness. V'loi tachgar achar hoasidos. Don't investigate the future. Elakol ma sheyavai alecha, whatever comes upon you, kabel betmimas, accept wholesomely. Ve'az tiyeh imai, then you will be with Him, amai, or His people, ulachelkai, and his chelek. What's Rashi saying? Rashi saying the Torah just warned us, don't go to diviners, don't go to sorcerers, don't go to stargazers, don't try to predict the future, but rather what should a Jew's attitude be? You should be wholesome with Hashem. Hashem, I don't know what tomorrow brings, and I'm not going to try to figure out what tomorrow brings. I don't know what next year brings. I don't know what the rest of my life will bring. I take it, whatever you bring, whatever you visit upon me, I am a makabel, that this is your ratzain. And if you do that, then you will be Hashem's. Now, Rashi's pshat in the pasuk is definitely kipshuta, is definitely the most straightforward reading of the pasuk. Don't go to diviners, rather be innocent and don't investigate the future. Allow Hashem's gezeros to befall you. But then Rashi adds in these words, then you will be Hashem's. Where did Rashi get that from? Where did Rashi, what Rashi is giving us his own personal promise? By the way, if you don't investigate the future, then you will be Hashem's nation and His chelek. What's Rashi telling me there? Is this like the personal guarantee of Rashi? Rashi is not a big Rebbe giving brachas. Rashi is throwing in, by the way, now that I give you my pshat, I'm going to give you a bracha. That if you don't investigate the future, then you'll be the share of Hashem. Why is Rashi, it's like he's adding in an editorial comment. By the way, I think this is so important that if you don't investigate the future, you will be God's. Apparently, no, Rashi doesn't do that. Rashi is translating the pasuk, and you'll see how. Because this Rashi, even though it seems to be very innocent, Rashi is actually saying that the pasuk means two separate things. There are two different meanings of the words. Okay. But Rashi learns, don't investigate the future. So you say, well, I know this guy, he lives in some city in Eretz Yisrael, and he hasn't eaten for 3 years, and he's going to put different bands around my arm, and he's going to give me things with like 10 eyes on it, and he's going to tell me what's going to be in 6 months from now. Don't do it. According to Rashi, it's a lav in the Torah. You don't investigate the future. Doesn't matter who's telling you the future. Doesn't matter why they're telling you the future. The Rebbe Hashem says, you walk with me innocently. Don't try to figure out what the future. Kol ma sheyavoi alecha, whatever befalls you, kabel betmimos. Don't start investigating. Someone's going to read your nose, your eyes, your forehead, your hands. All of that is a violation of the pasuk of Tamim Tihiyeh im Hashem Elokecha. I'm not getting into that. Last year, Wednesday night, we gave a whole shiur on that. You can check it up. And by the way, Rabbi Yaakov Hillel has a whole sefer called Tamim Tihiyeh on all of these various practices that unfortunately are somewhat prevalent today. But we're going to speak about this in a halachic sense today, a little bit differently. What is this idea of don't investigate the future? By the way, comes the Stipler. The Stipler brings now one of the most astounding ramazim I ever heard. And the first thing in order to understand this remez is you need to learn a new aspect of Gematria, and that is the following. Everybody knows every letter in the Hebrew alphabet is assigned a certain numerical value. Aleph is 1, Beis is 2, Gimel is 3, Yod is 10, Chaf is 20, Mem is 40, Sadi is 90, Kuf is 100, up to 400 Taf, yeah? But there's another, it continues. And by the way, the Rabbi Yehuda in his Hakdama to Shas alludes to this. There are enda letters, there are final letters, right? Menatzbach, right? So you have the first of the enda letters, even though it's not written in this way, is a final Chaf. Final Chaf is assigned a value of 500. Final Mem is assigned a value of 600. A final Nun is 700. A final Pei, 800. A final Tzadi, 900. So what's 1,000?
Aleph.
Back to Aleph now becomes Elef. So it's a never-ending cycle. Okay? If you take the words Tamim Tihiyeh, but using the final Mem as 600, the Gematria of it is 1478. Adding each letter as well. So Tamim Tihiyeh is 1470, plus the 8 letters, 1478. What does Rashi say on those words? Loi lachgar achar ha'asidais. Don't investigate the future. The Gematria of Rashi's Perush is the same Gematria as the words of the Torah. Whoa. The words Tamim Tihiyeh is the Gematria of Rashi's Perush Loi lachgar achar ha'asidais. By the way, the Stipler thought of that during Kriyas HaTorah. So, by the way, this is not the only time. Often the Stipler finds that the Perush of Rashi is the Gematria of the words of the Chumash, which is an amazing thing. Okay? It's off by one, but we know that is allowed. The Gematria of Leilachar Chasidos, I believe, is 1479. Okay? So that's an interesting thing. So the Sharei Aaron, which is Rav Aaron Rata, one of the a modern-day Perush on Rashi, which is a wonderful commentary on Perush Rashi. He collects many of the various Mefarshim on Rashi. He points out that according to Rashi, the word Tamim then means a language of innocence. For example, Avimelech said, Bisam levavi uvenikyoin kapaya sisizais. I did this innocently. In other words, Tamim doesn't mean whole, like the Chovos HaLevavos learns, be complete, that there shouldn't be contradiction between heart and limbs. Tamim means what? Innocent. Or like in Malachim, they were firing their arrows letumai, innocently. Don't be an Ibr Chacham. That's what Tamim means. Don't be an Ibr Chacham. Don't say, let me try to figure out, I'm gonna do this because in 30 years from now it's gonna come out. Don't make these kind of cheshbainos. Don't be such a big chacham. You take it a day at a time. Whatever the Rebbeinu Shalom brings your way, accept it, the tmimos, with innocence. By the way, Rashi, like we pointed out, ends his commentary by saying, V'oz tiyeh amoy ulechalkai. Says the Sharei Aaron, Rashi is learning this pasuk, that not only is it an admonition, but it's also a guarantee. Like this. Tamim Tihiyeh. If you act wholesomely, you know what you'll be? Im Hashem Elokecha. Then you will be with God. Otherwise, you say, I go to the sorcerers, and I go to the palm readers, and I go to the Mikubalim. So God said, fine. You go with them, but you're not with me. Have your choice. Who are you with? Whose team are you on? Whose team are you on? Says the Sharei Aaron, so according to Rashi, there are 2 dimensions of the pasuk. Number 1, look at the final paragraph. Shnei dvarim nemru kam b'pasuk. There are 2 things in this pasuk. Number 1, ashara, a warning. Dahainu tamim tihiyeh im Hashem Elokecha. You should be wholesome with Hashem. Koloimar shetelech imoi b'tmimos. So you should go with Him wholesomely. V'loi tachgar achar asidos. And not investigate the future. That's the first thing, it's a warning. And the second thing is, it's a haftacha, it's a promise. Tamim tihiyeh, you should be wholesome. In other words, if you are wholesome, yiyeh im Hashem Elokecha. So really there are 2 dimensions of meaning in this pasuk according to Rashi. And we're going to focus today on Rashi's pshat. But I do want to tell you another way of learning this pasuk. And that is the way that Targum Unklos learns the pasuk. Look at number 7. Targum Unklos says, Tamim tihiyeh im Hashem Elokecha. Shalim Tihiyeh b'dachalta d'Hashem aleikach. Complete you should be in your fear of God. Tamim Tihiyeh im Hashem aleikach. You should be complete in your fear of God. Now, what does that have to do with don't go to diviners, and don't go to sorcerers, and don't go to animal charmers, and don't consult the dead? But what should you do? Be wholesome in fear of God? Well, it's not a contrast. What does fear of God have to do with not going to these practitioners? So the Ramban explains that Targum Onkelos means the following: that a person should believe that only Hashem really knows what the future has in store. And only to God could you seek out the future, either from His Nevi'im or the Urim V'Tumim. But don't go to stargazers, and don't go to sorcerers. And if they tell you something's going to happen, don't believe them. Say Hakol B'dei Shamayim. Don't be afraid of them. Don't be afraid of their predictions. Don't be afraid of their prognostications. If they predict something, fear not, because they don't really know. Only God knows. And the more you fear God, the less you are going to fear any of these types of practitioners. So that's the Ramban's understanding of Targum Onkelos, that what does it mean, be wholesome in your fear of God? Someone who truly fears God will not be afraid of the predictions of other people. Now, just so you should know, this inyan of Tamim Tihiyeh, the Rambam does bring it down, not as a mitzvah, but in the Yad HaChazak, he brings it down in Hilchos Avodah Zarah. He does not count it as one of the mitzvahs. The Ramban, though, does count it as one of the 613 mitzvahs. Look at number 10. The Ramban, in his list of mitzvahs that the Rambam left out, the Ramban says a very new definition of Tamim Tihiyeh im Hashem aleikach. And that is, this is not the first time Hashem asked somebody to be a Tamim. In Parshas Lech Lecha, Hashem tells Avraham Avinu by Bris Milah, Hishalech lefanai v'heyei Tamim. Why at Bris Milah did Hashem tell Avraham to be a Tamim? Because Hashem just told Avraham, don't pay attention to the stars. Don't pay attention to the astrological signs, because after all, Avraham Avinu looked up in the Shamayim and it said, Avraham einoi hoilet, Sarah einoi yoiledes. Hashem said, no, say me it's stagniso shalcha, go out of your astrological signs, because I override the system, I'm on top of the system. So Avraham may think to himself, okay, the Ribono Shel Olam is the big boss, and he allocated other jobs to the smaller bosses, the constellations, the astrological signs, and they are given certain jobs, but the Ribono Shel Olam oversees. Hashem says, no! Hisalech lefanai v'heyei tamim. It's only me. Pay no attention to any of the lesser authorities. They have no authority. Ignore them completely. Lo yistakel b'inyanam klal. Don't pay attention at all. So according to the Ramban, the definition of Tamim is wholeheartedly trust in Hashem without any faith in anybody else's. I'm going to probably have a good day. I daven well, but I passed by that black cat, so maybe 1%. No, not 1%. It's stupidity. Don't pay any attention. Yeah, I opened up my fortune cookie and it says so. I'm a little nervous. You ignore it completely. You open up your umbrella in the house. Don't worry, nothing's going to happen to you.
Walk under it.
Okay? All that stuff is nonsense. Okay. Back to Rashi, and that's what I want to focus on. The halachic parameters of not investigating the future. So first I want to tell you some Dvar Agadata on this. It's brought down from Rav Pinela Meostila, a Talmud of Chassam Sofer, that the Chassam Sofer says like this. He heard it from his Rebbe Rav Nosson Adler. The pasuk says, "Ve'esav ish yoidea tzayid ish sadeh." So the word ish appears 2 times, right? Ve'esav ish yoidea tzayid ish sadeh. Number 12. And Rav Nosson Adler says, what does it mean? Esav ish yodei atzad ish sadeh. There's a certain being which is connected by the navel to the earth. It's called the Avnei Hasadeh. It's mentioned in Masechta Klayim. And this is the Yedoni. When Rashi says, don't go to the Yedoni, Rashi says you would take a bone from a certain chaya and put it in your mouth, and it would predict the future. Sifsei Chachamim identifies this as the Avnei Sadeh. So Esav knew the trick how to catch the Ish Sadeh. And what did he need the Ish Sadeh for? He wanted to prognosticate the future. That's the meaning of the pasuk, says Rav Nosson Adler. Esav Ish Yodei Atzayid Ish Sadeh. He knew how to capture the Ish Sadeh. So comes Rav Pinula Me'ostila. He said, according to this, the next pasuk is beautiful. But Yaakov had no interest in such a thing. What was Yaakov? The Yaakov Ish Tam. Yaakov was a Tam. What does it mean he was a Tam? Meaning he was not someone who was doiresh el ha'aseh. He did not investigate the future. He didn't look at fortune cookies, and he didn't look at the mazolos, and he didn't look at any of this other nonsense that people look after. One time there was, I'm embarrassed to say, there was a Jewish radio station, and they had people calling up the so-called makubal, and the person would say their birthday, and the makubal would give certain information, right? Prediction. So this girl called up, and she said, "My birthday is Tes Teves." Oh, Yud Beis Teves, and you hear him flipping some book. You're gonna be. So the girl said, "No, Tes Teves." Oh, Tes Teves. You hear the book flipping the other way. It's all nonsense. That's not Judaism. It's a violation of Tamim, Tihiyeh, Hashem. Okay. By the way, the Chafetz Chaim also has a beautiful vart on this idea of Tamim Tihiyeh Hashem Alikecha on the pasuk Tairas Hashem Temima Meshivas Nafesh, where Chazal tell us that when Klal Yisrael stood on Har Sinai to be Mekabel the Torah, Hashem said, "How can I give you the Torah? I need a guarantor. Who says you're going to keep the Torah?" So Klal Yisrael said, "The Avos will be our guarantor." So Hashem said, "I have tainus on them." Avraham Avinu said, "B'ma'eda," and Hashem did not accept the arevos of the avos. So Klal Yisrael said, "Our children will be the arevim." That's the medrash. Frek the Chafetz Chaim. If the avos could not be the arev because of what they did, then kal v'chomer the banim. Doesn't Hashem know what the banim are going to do? If even Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were not eligible, then kal v'chomer the banim are not eligible. But says the Chafetz Chaim, the Rebbeinu Shem didn't do that. The Rebbeinu Shem gave us the Torah b'temimos. He didn't look into the future. That's the meaning, says the Chafetz Chaim. Torahs Hashem temima. The Torah of God was wholesome. God did not investigate what will be in the future. He gave it to us without investigating. Okay, so this brings us to a series of halachic issues which are quite interesting. And that is, there are certain medical procedures which are able to prognosticate and predict and potentially save people and parents from a lot of future tsar and aggravation. And is it permitted to utilize these medical procedures, or are they a violation of Tamim Tihiyeh Im Hashem Lakecha? So let's discuss first genetic testing. So unfortunately there's a disease called Tay-Sachs. And Tay-Sachs, for a child, to be born with Tay-Sachs, both parents have to be a carrier. Now if one is a carrier,
my wife but not Tay-Sachs. Very simple.
So if both parents are carriers, a carrier will not harm the carrier themselves, but if both parents are carriers, there is a high percentage chance that it will be passed on to the children. And the question is, can a young man and woman who are now in the Parsha of looking for a shidduch, are they allowed to take advantage of these medical tests to see if they're carriers in order to prevent future tsar that they could possibly avoid? So this question was raised to Moshe Feinstein in Igros Moshe, Even Oezer, Chelek Gimel, and Rav Moshe says the following. Look on page 3, the top line. Says Rav Moshe, Iyanti bozeh, I investigated this. V'zehu hanira la'ani azdaiti. Ki af shehu miyot katan yoladim noiladim ke'elu. Even though it's only a minority of children, la'yaleinu, born this way. And at first glance, maybe you'll say, V'shayach loymar al zeh hakra, de Tamim Tihiyeh Hashem Elokecha. Maybe you would say, we should apply the pasuk Tamim Tihiyeh, like Rashi says, His halech imay v'tmimos utetzaf eloi v'la yitachar achar asidos. Rashi says, don't look into the future. Whatever the Yibam Hashem sends your way, be makabel b'tmimos. So maybe we should not be undergoing these tests. Says Rav Moshe, listen to this. Mikal makom, kivan she'ata nasa zeh ba'ofen kal livdaik. Since it's become very easy to check, yesh ladon, you can make the case, shem einoi boydek es atzmai, if you don't check, hu skiras ha'inayim, lirois ma'ashev shalos. That's not called not investigating the future. That's called sticking your head in the sand. That's called keeping your eyes closed. Since it's such an easy procedure, it's not a big deal. You know, you don't have to have anesthesia. They just prick you and they take some blood and they can tell you immediately, are you a carrier and not a carrier? And says Rav Moshe, that's one factor. One factor is it's very easy. Another factor is, on the other hand, the parents would be experiencing tsar gadol me'oid. This is a matter of tremendous, terrible tsar for the parents. Min haroi, therefore it is correct. Lamisha tzarach lisa isha, someone who needs getting married, livdoik es atzmai. You should have yourself tested. Says Rav Moshe, put in ads in the newspapers, advertise as much as possible so that everyone should be aware of this possibility of genetic testing.
Many rabbis insist on it.
Yeah. Okay. However, says Rav Moshe, it should be done in a very private way. And it is so privately that nobody should know anyone else's business, and nobody should know about someone if they're a carrier. Why? And even the doctor who does the badika, he's not allowed to tell anybody. Why? You say, what's the big deal? If you're a carrier, as long as your wife is not a carrier, or vice versa, then it will have no influence on the children. So why can't you walk around? Why can't, we'll put signs, this kid's a carrier, that kid's a carrier. It's not a big deal, as long as you marry someone who's not a carrier. Says Rav Moshe, because lo yaminu har b'nei adam, people are not going to believe the doctors when the doctors say, you can marry this person because you're not a carrier, they're a carrier, nothing will happen to your children. People are not going to believe the medical world, and they're going to say, you know what, why take a chance? Why marry that person? I'm going to take a chance. They're a carrier. People will not be able to get over the fact that somebody's a carrier. The doctors could take an oath. The doctors could show the statistics. If people, it's already a mum. Yeah, I'm better off marrying someone who's not a carrier. You know how it is when it comes to shidduchim. Okay, everything is good, but why go there? Why go there? So says Rav Moshe, don't tell anybody about it. And therefore these testings should not be done in yeshivas, not be done in schools. It should be a private thing. Now nowadays, even though they do in yeshivas, but they don't give the results in the yeshiva, so it's not a big deal. Okay. And then Rav Moshe says a very important svara. Listen to this. Says Rav Moshe, unfortunately we live in a generation where people are mentally extremely weak and vulnerable. Says Rav Moshe, Yadua koichos hanefesh sheroiv b'nei adam soivlin harbe mehatzavim shalohem shenikru nervin. Most people are nervous wrecks. Most people's mental consistency, most people's mental makeup is very weak. And people have all these anxieties and all these nervousness and all these phobias. That what is the underlying explanation? So most people make a mound out of a molehill. Most people, they take this little thing, they blow it out of proportions. And if you're going to tell somebody you're a carrier, they're going to need therapy. They're going to need carrier therapy. They're going to need to see a psychiatrist or something. So you're going to tell a 15-year-old kid he's going to be worried his whole adolescence, he's never going to get married. Says Moshe, be very careful, chas v'shalom, to do it on a young boy or a young girl. Do not test a kid until they're starting to think about marriage. 18, 19, they're going to be a nervous wreck. And says Moshe, a boy, maybe when he becomes 20 and he starts thinking about it, that would be a good time. A girl a little younger. But what's going to be with the boy? He wants to get married before his friends, and he wants to get married early, and he's never going to do the testing. But Moshe says, that kid will be Tamim Tihiyeh with that kid. We won't check that kid. That kid, nothing will happen to. But maybe, no. For the benefit of the klal, don't let these young men be tested until they're in the parsha of getting married. And says Moshe, since it's so well known already, if a kid wants to get married earlier, he'll know to get tested earlier. But Rav Moshe gives advises that genetic testing is recommended. Barashi says that Tamim Tihiyeh means Shaloi Lachar Achar Hasidos. Says Rav Moshe, it's so easy to test. And it's, on the other side, it could cause so much tsar that this is something that we need to do. Now, if we could add to Rav Moshe, who are we to add to Rav Moshe saying, but maybe just as ha'ara, we could add another point, that maybe we could say genetic testing is not called prediction or prognostication. Right now, is the person a carrier or is he not a carrier? Are you really looking into the future, or is it determining the current status of the person? So maybe you can make the case also, that's not called being doiresh achar ha'asid, that's not called looking into the future, that's establishing what the medical condition of the person is right now. Okay, but that's not a story Rav Moshe used, so we'll stick with what Rav Moshe said, that it's something very easy, and it's also something that could avoid much tsar.
Were all the Golan in consensus with Rav Moshe?
No.
Can't hear with a
There are some communities that they don't do genetic testing, but the overwhelming majority of Gedolim, I believe, did agree with Rav Moshe. Most communities today,
They don't do it.
for this reason. For this reason.
Moshe has a shiur also on life insurance. Similarly, should have put some life insurance. Yeah. He says the same thing. He should do it.
It's an easy thing, but I think he has a preference of one type of insurance, maybe term over a whole life or something. Okay, but now let's talk about another issue, and that is, are you allowed to determine the gender of a child before it's born? Or is that considered violating the concept of be wholesome with Hashem? Whatever Hashem sends your way, accept. Don't investigate the future. Well, I need to know now, what color should I paint the room? I got to know. There's a sale now on the paint. You know, if I get the baby, the crib and the carriage now, or maybe is it better not to? So there's a sefer on the Parsha, it's called Genuzos HaParsha. He brings down that Rav Menashe Klein wrote to him personally that one should not do so. One should not determine the gender of the child before. Why? Tamim Tihiyeh im Hashem Elokecha. Don't investigate the future. By the way, if I'm not mistaken, our Rashira of Henach, he also recommended, again, I don't think this is an Isser, but it's a hashkafa, that not to investigate the future. What's the benefit, he says? And by the way, he writes that many times it could really affect the shalom bias. You're hoping for one, you're hoping for a boy, you're hoping for a girl, and so forth. And when a person maybe is disappointed, it could lead to fighting. And Rav Menashe Klein says it has led to abortions. People were so upset. And he calls them by the Anoshim Kalei Hadas, and therefore, better not to. That's the opinion of Rav Menashe Klein. There's a medrash. The medrash says there are 7 things in this world that are hidden from man. Kasher eincha yoidea. If you don't know, right? There's a pasuk in Koheles. Kasher eincha yoidea ma derech haruach. Nobody knows what way the wind will blow. Ke'atzamim bebeten hamaleya. Just like bones in a mother's womb, which presumably nobody knows what it is. So too nobody knows the ways of God. So Shlomo Melech is saying, Just like nobody knows the gender of a child, so too nobody will know the ways of Hashem. And in fact, the Medrash comments on this pasuk. There's a Medrash in Koheles Rabbah. On this pasuk, it's also a Medrash in Parshas Toldos. There are 7 things hidden from man. Yom HaMisa, nobody knows the day they'll go. Yom HaNechama, nobody knows the day of consolation. Nobody understands the depth of judgment. Nobody knows what his friend is thinking. Uma bi'ibura shalisha. Nobody knows what is in a woman's womb. And on the Medrash, one of the classic commentaries on the Medrash, one of the earliest commentators on the Medrash, the Yefei Tayar, Rabbi Shmuel ben Yitzchak Yefei Ashkenazi, he lived from 1525 to 1595. He points out that all of these 7 things that nobody knows about are a chesed to man. What's the chesed? Because a person would know they're going to live for another 90 years. They may not produce. But because nobody knows, and the person always has the concern, who knows, it motivates the person to accomplish.
What does Yom Nechama mean?
Presumably the day of Eliyahu Hanavi. But says Yefei Tayar, it's a big chesed that Hashem does not allow parents to know the gender of the child. What's the chesed? Number 1, that if the child is born a different gender than you were hoping, you didn't have to suffer for 9 months knowing about it from the beginning. Number 2, and let's say you're happy with what you had. Let's say you wanted a boy and you had a boy. If you knew you were having a boy the last 7 months, so then when the baby is born, there's no excitement. You knew the whole time. And the Hashem wanted, after all, when a baby is born, it's not easy for the mother. It's hard for the mother. So at least they get a little bit of a perk with the excitement of finding out what type of child they're going to have. And there are many other benefits, he writes, of not knowing, and therefore, they asked Reb Chaim Kanievsky, should a person try to determine the gender of the child? And Reb Chaim writes, number 18, Ein roi lasos kach. It's not appropriate. It's not appropriate. Comes Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein, and Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein asks, but wait a second. But the Medrash says that one of the 7 things that nobody knows about is the gender of the child. So has modern technology, is that a challenge to what the Medrash is saying? The Medrash, which is Misinai, says that one of the 7 things we don't know is the gender. And now they created a technology called ultrasound that through sound waves we're able to make a picture of the child. So is that a question on the Torah? So Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein says no. Because it doesn't say that nobody knows what's in the stomach of a mi'uberes. It says nobody knows what's in the stomach of an isha. Chassam Sofer writes in a tshuva, there's a difference between an isha and a mi'uberes. Mi'uberes is after the 3rd month. An isha is before the 3rd month. Before the 3rd month, even with ultrasound, you can't determine the gender of the child. I don't think. But a muberes, the Medrash didn't say that nobody knows what's in the womb of a muberes. Medrash never made that comment. And therefore, sonograms are not a challenge to the comment of the Medrash. But I will tell you that even if they do tell you the gender, don't take it to the bank. Don't take it to the bank.
Surprise.
What? Don't call them all.
Surprise.
Not always right.
Okay? That's just Eitz Tova. Yeah.
A woman in her first trimester is not a muberes.
She is not given the name Muberes. The language Muberes in Chazal is given only Mishahukar Ibura. When it's recognizable. So now we have a Kohen, right? You're a Kohen? Yeah. Any other Kohanim here? All right. So here's a very interesting shaila. Okay? Are you allowed to give a child below the age of chinuch? You have no mitzvah to train him in mitzvahs. Could you give him pork? No, you can't give him pork. Or chazer treif, or any of that. Yeah. Tinoik she'enoi bar havana, osir lachnisa biyadayim. You're not allowed to give him treif biyadayim. So let's say you have a little kohen. Are you allowed to take a little 3-year-old kohen into the cemetery? No. If he runs into the cemetery, you don't have to stop him. But you can't actively take the kid into the cemetery, because you're not allowed to be yadayim, cause a little child to do an avera. So the shaila is, can a mother who's married to a kohen go into a cemetery? You hear this? A pregnant woman, can she go into a cemetery if her husband's a kohen? Comes the roikeach, the shach says in the name of the roikeach, a woman who's pregnant and she's an Eishes kohen is allowed to go into a cemetery. Why? Svek sveika. Maybe the child won't be a viable child. Who says she's carrying a viable child? We hope, but maybe it will be an Eifel. And even if it's a viable child, maybe it will be in a keva. And therefore, halacha l'masa, a wife of a kohen who's pregnant may enter a cemetery. Svek sveika. You got it? Maybe it will be a nefel, and even if it's a ben kayama, maybe it will be a nekeva. Ask the Magen Avram, wait a second, why did the roikeach have to say svek sveika? Forget about svek sveika. There's a rule that tuma bilua eina metama. Right now the child is in his mother's womb. The child cannot become tameh in his mother's womb. Just because the mother becomes tameh, the child doesn't become tameh. It's not like her heart is becoming tameh or her liver is becoming tameh. The kid doesn't become tameh. So why the roikeach have to say svek sveika? Just say very simply, if a mother is carrying a child, the child will not contract tumah. That's the kasha of the Magen Avram on the roikeach. You got it? The roikeach, quoted by the shach, says a wife of a kohen who's pregnant may go into a cemetery svek sveika, to which the Magen Avram asks, what do you need svek sveika? Tuma belua eina matam. Comes the Mishnah Berurah, and the Mishnah Berurah says, you can't bring a little kid into a cemetery if he's a kohen. You can't give him any other isra biyadayim. An eishes kohen who is pregnant and she's about to give birth, she was allowed to give birth in a cemetery. Why she wants to give birth in a cemetery? It beats me. But you'll see it's a common case because hospitals, for all intents and purposes, are like cemeteries.
Oh.
Not just because it's dangerous over there, but they have a morgue there. A woman is about to give birth, if she's an Eishes Kohen, could do it in an oyal ameis. Why? Svek sveika. Says the Mishnah Berurah in the Shar HaTzion, this answers the kasha of the Magen Avram on the roikeach. What does he mean? Very passionate. The Magen Avram asks on the roikeach, why do you need the reason of svek sveika? Just say you're allowed to go into the oyal mace because the kid is protected in his mother's womb. Mishnah Berurah says the answer is because we're talking about a case where she's about to give birth. She won't be protected by the mother's womb anymore. So how could a mother who's an Eishes Kohen give birth in a cemetery, but if she gives birth to a ben zachar, she's biyadayim, causing him to become tameh? And don't say tuma, the kid is protected in his mother's womb. She's about to give birth. The answer is it's mutter. Why? Svek sveika. Maybe it will be a nefel, and even if it's a ben kayama, maybe it will be a nekeva. So far, bottom line, if I were to ask you, Bizman hazeh, most hospitals have mesim in them. Can a wife of a kohen give birth in a hospital? You say, where do you want her to give birth? At home? That's not practical. It's sakanas nefashos. But let's say Eretz Yisrael, where there are different types of hospitals. You could go to Shaarei Tzedek, or you could go to Hadassah. And in Shaarei Tzedek, they're makbid that if there's a mace, they seal it off. And other hospitals, not so. Does the wife of a kohen, is she mechuyev to give birth in Shaarei Tzedek hospital? And it's most interesting, and this is not an advertisement for Shaarei Tzedek. No connection. They didn't pay me for this. But Rav Sternbach in the Tshuvas HaHanhagos, Chela Gimel, Siman Shin Mem Zayin, he writes, she cannot give birth in a regular hospital. This is a number 23. A Batei Cholim, if an Eishes Kohen wants to give birth, where there are many Mesim in a Beis Cholim, says Rav Sternbach, I very much warned against this when I was in Johannesburg. And therefore, a wife of a Kohen, if she has a choice to give birth in Shaarei Tzedek, and as opposed to Hadassah, Says, but what if she says, I feel much more comfortable in this hospital, my doctor's there. And there is a svara that if a woman needs something, that could be pikuach nefashos. Says Rav Sternbach, not every little thing that a woman needs, all of a sudden we see pikuach nefashos. Let's say, the day after she gave birth, she said, my whole life I really wanted Burger King and I really need it right now. So now all of a sudden it's pikuach nefashos. Not every whim of a lady do we... Now this seems to be against the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah says, svek sveika. Yeah.
I don't understand. Shari said it closes off so that Kahanim shouldn't walk in because there are dead people in the hospital. How did that help the mother giving birth in the hospital?
I don't know, maybe I don't know. I thought they have ways of sealing off the hallway from one unit to another. In other words, somehow it will stop the tumah from going into the maternity ward. I don't know. I'm not sure. Let's assume they could do something like that. So,
They put a sign up in the parking lot.
Open one, the other one's closed.
yeah, it's sealed, let's say.
So we can't both be open at the same time.
You have no choice. You can't give birth, at home unless... Okay, now the Shevet Halevi, Rav Vosner, one of the Poskei Hadar, who's nifter recently, he writes a very interesting tshuva on this issue. And he says like this. Is there any problem with the mother going in right now? No. Why? Sex feika. Well, even it's tuma blua right now. Right now it's tuma blua, right? Elamai, she's going to be putting the kid in a situation where as soon as he's born, he's going to come tameh. So what are you going to do? You're going to remove this kayin kid as soon as he's born? Can't do that. It's pikuach nefashos. So right now it's mutter. Elamai, you're putting the kid in a situation where he's going to have to do an aveira, but it will be mutter because at that time it's pikuach nefashos. You're allowed to do that. You're allowed to do something which right now is permitted and will lead to an aveira which will also be permitted because it will be pikuach nefashos. Elamai, you'll say, but let's avoid the situation. Why do you have to avoid the situation? If right now what you're doing is completely legitimate, because you're not doing any aveira, you're not causing the kid to do an aveira, Elamai, you're doing something that could put the child in a situation where the only reason he's allowed to remain there is because of pikuach nefashos. Says Rav Vosner, it's mutter. Here, take a look at number 24. V'hayoytzi mizeh al kapanim lahalacha ein iser lasos pu'ulas heter achshav. You're allowed to do a permitted act now, asher b'soifa shel davar, that in the end, yitzmach mizeh will cause dechias din Torah mikayach pikuach nefashos. So here too, he says like this. Right now, everybody agrees that the woman needs to go to the hospital. Pikuach nefashos to go to the hospital. What, she can give birth at home? Who's going to deliver the child? Hatzalah? Not sure if that's the best way to do it. I don't know if that's, recommended. The midwife. Shifra and Puah are going to come. So right now it's legitimate, she needs to go. And by going now, it's mutter. It's a svek sveika. It's tuma blua. But the kid will be born. And when the kid is born, now the kid might be a boy. And if the kid's a boy, it's going to be an isser to be there. But what are you going to do? You can't move the little baby then. It's mutter to do that. And therefore, says Rav Vosner, don't make such a big deal that women, they want to give birth in whatever hospital they want. It's mutter. Okay, now listen to this one. Now, here's where it turns. Comes Reb Zilberstein, and he wrote a sefer on pregnancy and birth in halacha called Tairas HaYoledes. So wait a second. What's the heter for a kohen to give birth in the hospital? Svek sveika. You cannot rely on svek sveika if it's efsher levarer. If it's possible. In other words, what's the heter? Maybe it will be a nefel, not a bar kayoma. And even if it's a bar kayoma, maybe it will be a girl. Maybe it'll be a girl, yeah? So why don't you do an ultrasound? Do an ultrasound. And if it's a girl, then you say, go to go to Hadassah. And if it's a boy, then you make her go to... Right? In other words, the whole heter to go to a regular hospital is svek sveika. This ain't no svek sveika. Use ultrasound, and then it won't be svek sveika anymore. Says Rabbi Zilberstein, it's very reasonable to assume you're not required to start taking sonograms to determine the gender, so now we can say, oh, now it's a boy, it's only a suffix, you can't use that hospital anymore. That's too much. That's going too far. One is not required, he says. It's reasonable that one would not be required to go through the process of an ultrasound to determine the gender of the child. However, Rebbe Yashiv paskined, you ready for this? That the wife of a kohen would have to take an ultrasound, and based on the ultrasound, determine which hospital the mother should give birth in. Now again, what about the Sfek Sveika? The answer is, it's not a contradiction. The Mishnah Berurah, they didn't have ultrasound. So it's a Sfek Sveika, it's a legitimate Sfek Sveika. But it's not a Sfek Sveika anymore. Maybe it will be a girl, maybe it will be a girl. Find out right now whether it's a... don't look into the future. Don't look into the future just because for the sake of curiosity. But if it's a matter of Isser and Heter, and the Kohen has to maintain their Tahara, therefore, at least in this letter, it's published in the Kovitz Maria, Rabbi Efrati writes that Rabbi Yashiv recommended that a wife of a Kohen should have an ultrasound and thereby determine what hospital. Now, in the United States of America, I don't think they have these types of hospitals, which are Kohen-friendly hospitals. But this would be an interesting possibility. And so far we've had a number of different explanations of the words Tamim Tihiyeh. Chayvus Havavos, that one's inner thoughts should be equal and on par with one's actions. We have the explanation of Rashi, don't look into the future, but whatever comes to a person to be Mekabel, B'tmimos. We have the explanation of the Targum Onkelos, that one should fear only God and not fear any other predictions. And Rabbi Rabbeinu Yoina in the Sharei Tshuva tells us another aspect of the mitzvah of Tamim Tihiyeh, which fits in very well with Rashi that we just learned. That Rabbeinu Yoina learns that the mitzvah of bitachon emanates from the pasuk of Tamim Tihiyeh im Hashem. Because you can ask, in Sefer Tehillim it's full of bitach b'Hashem, v'yiftechu b'cha, but where in the Chumash does it mention a mitzvah d'oraisa of trust in Hashem, have bitachon Hashem? Says Rabbeinu Yoina, here we have it. It's the mitzvah of Tamim Tihiyeh, and to which Rashi gives us not his personal promise, but the promise of Hashem himself. Says Rebbe Sham, there are a lot of people out there who would like to let you know what the future has in store. Says Rebbe Sham, you stick with me and trust in me, yearn for me, be mitzapeh for my Yeshua, and then va'az tiyeh imay ulechalkai, then we will be zoicha to be together, very close to Hashem, and be considered the chelek of Hashem, ki chelek Hashem amay. Rabbi, have a good day.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.